The top 3 spin pre-flop mistakes you must avoid at all costs. Welcome, dear viewers.
Hi.
My name's Texas Tom. I've been a high-stakes spin and go coach for the last 10 years.
That sounds painful.
Today, we're going to look at some low-stakes strategy guides in regards to pre-flop and some of the mistakes you might be making. Now, some of you may be cynical, thinking, yeah, maybe you're winning at the high stakes. But bro, don't you know how tough it is to win at the low stakes? They just call me any 2 cards, mate.
And he decides to fire all in on the river here. But unfortunately for Peter, he is about to learn that Alan Keating never has to fold anything.
Yeah, this guy's something else, man.
You can't win at the low stakes. To which I'll say, have you seen our crushing the micro stakes series over here? And also, if you'd like to watch the Twitch where we play the 25 cents, you'll see our latest results are here. Maybe they're good, maybe they're bad, I'm not sure. And I'd like to just officially declare myself, and I'm not one for being braggadocious, dear viewers, as you know. But I'd like to declare that I might just be the best spin and go player in the world at the 25 cents. So here are 3 key fundamental pre-flop spots that should work at the low stakes spins, but also will be important against recreationals or weaker players, whatever bind you're currently playing. Okay, pre-flop mistake number 1 to avoid is going to be small blind versus big blind, keeping that VPIP high. This is such a common pattern. I've worked with probably, honestly, close to almost 1,000 players now in terms of spin and go. And the number 1 pre-flop mistake I see in terms of the low stakes guys, the micro stakes guys, and the guys that are playing recreationals is they don't VPIP wide enough when they're playing blind v blind. I'll take a look at Lucid. By the way, Lucid is available. If you'd like to follow Lucid YouTube channel, maybe they'll put a link in the description. Who knows? And let's say you're playing a reg speed game and you're trying to figure out what should I play as a VPIP, and you can see that we're playing about 66% of our hands. Now, whether you call or whether you raise is actually fairly meaningless in terms of dictating the EVs. I've seen good win rates with guys who have a limp heavy strategy. I've seen good win rates with guys who have a raise heavy strategy, but the thing that ties them all together is VPIP, and against recreationals, really, really important. Little challenge for everybody. If you're an experienced player and you want to take a look at your population and have a look at the ISOing frequency. So when we limp first in, when we call, for example, how often are we getting ISO'd? How often are we getting raised after calling? You can see that in GTO land, we're getting ISO'd about 38% of the time. If you look at your population, I would be prepared to bet pretty healthy money as an average that most people, because I've, as I said, worked with lots of people, and I would say something in the region of 98% of the people I've worked with have had a population that they're playing that is heavily under raising when they limp first in. The lower the stakes you play, typically the more that your population is under raising facing a limp. So when we think about the hands that are not raising, most people are very good at raising their strong hands. So if we go and look at, for example, their aces, everybody remembers to raise aces, everyone remembers to raise their ace king, everyone remembers the ace 10 suited plus. No problems there. Where people often forget to raise in terms of the ISOs are the bluffs. The hands like Jack 5 off, the hands like 9 3 off, the hands like King 3 off, to give but an example. If you were to node lock the implications of these strategy adjustments, what would happen is the small blind would suddenly be incentive to VPIP a lot more. The marginal hands here that are mixed between calls and folds, which is much better served playing them as a VPIP. Often what you'll see here is population under 3-bet bluffing. You can see a decent amount of 3-bet bluffing happening here. Queen 9 down to Queen 5 are all 3-bet bluffing at some frequency. King 6, King 5, King 4, King 3, Ace 2, Ace 3, Ace 4. King 4 off is a jam sometimes. No, it isn't. It's actually just a 3-bet. 9 4 suited, 9 3 suited, 9 2 suited, and etc. Again, you look at your population, the majority of people you play will be under 3-betting in terms of the bluffs here. And again, if we were to apply those tendencies to our strategies, both of those would allow us to over VPIP against lower stakes populations, and especially recreationals. And one final thing to consider, when you play post-flop situations, typically you're going to over realize. Most of you guys watching, I'm fortunate enough to be able to be the one to tell you this, you're quite good poker players. And often you almost don't give yourself enough credit. You're playing an opponent that you don't know. This is Texas Tomo's top tip. If you don't know who you're playing, assume that you have more poker experience than them when it comes to deciding whether to have a post-flop edge or not. To give an example, you've dealt first hand, you're playing a $5 spin. You don't recognize the player in the big blind and you're on the small blind. What should your initial strategy be? Make sure you play enough hands. To give a little example, I'll pull up some numbers now. So I'll take my little 25 cent sample. And we'll just have a quick look at what my blind VPIP has been. Bear in mind that we saw GTO VPIP was something around 66%. You can see my VPIP currently 85%-ish, about 20% wider than GTO. This is against recreationals. There's probably room to potentially go even wider than that, but I would say at a minimum, try and aim for something VPIP if you're playing low stakes against lots of recreationals. Try and have a VPIP in the 75s to 80s. And make sure that you're giving yourself enough credit. You're going to over-realize the preflop EVs that you see here in the solver because, frankly, you're going to do better than the solver does because your opponent's going to do a lot worse than the solver does. And so even if you were to play kind of pure solver strategies and not exploit your population at all, they're still going to make big enough mistakes. They're going to stack off too light. They're going to make weird bluffs. They're not going to bluff enough, etc., etc. So, Texas Thomas first preflop tip for spins. Please VPIP enough blind v blind. I would say aim for something in the 70s plus as an average. 75. You're playing regs, obviously pay attention to their tendencies. You're playing straightforward regs who are under ISOing, make sure you limp wide enough over the weekend. Texas Tomo spin and go. Preflop tip number 2, heads up small blind VPIP. Now, you may have spotted a bit of a pattern here, but once again, it's a really important one to get right when you're playing a spin, especially for the guys who maybe have come from tournament backgrounds. Maybe they play tournaments or they play cash. Maybe you sort of were playing, spin and goes, relaxing, and you want to start taking them a bit more seriously after playing lots of hub games or live games. Very difficult, I think, to be aware of just how wide you should play VPIPs heads up. I can say this with first-hand experience. I came from a 6 max background in 2014 when I moved to spins. I was not a very good VPIP for my heads up small blind. It took me a long time to get my VPIP wide enough, and it's something that can really benefit you if you're able to get that to an appropriate amount. Once again, when we take a theory, look at theory here in Lucid Poker available. 94% at 25 BB. If you take a more kind of like typical heads up stack depth, 95% again. 10 BB starts dropping a little bit, 88%. But nevertheless, if we were to look at the response here, I would say for the majority of people, if they were to look at the population and see how is their population playing the big blind at 14 big blinds, you're once again, I would expect, going to see an under ISOing, similar pattern that we saw for the 300 big blind, an under ISOing of bluff. I would speculate, just again, based on lots of people I've worked with, most people are going to find the population, rather than having a 40% ISO, probably going to be 10%, 20% too tight, 36%, 32%, somewhere in those regions. The lower you play, the less you're going to see the ISO bluffs. ISO bluffing is quite unintuitive. We're going to talk about ISO bluffing in a second. But a lot of people don't take enough bluffs here and don't ISO enough hands. And because of that, from a pre-flop perspective, we want to VPIP wider than 95%. And from a post-flop perspective, we often want to VPIP wider than 95% on top of that. Now, there are exceptions to this rule. If you're playing someone, for example, that is wildly aggressive, wildly bluffy, wildly maniacal, and there just isn't that much room to make money from the bottom end of your range, you maybe don't need to VPIP as wide as GTO. Maybe they're under ISOing, but maybe they're donk shoving every flop, for example. Well, then you perhaps don't need to ISO 9-2 off, be that profitable in that game, but obviously, long term, you're going to be profitable in that game anyway. But the majority of, especially, I would say the average reg at the lower stakes is going to be under ISO bluffing. They're going to be under check raise bluffing. They're going to be under floating. They're going to be under aggressive in general post flop. And you can take advantage of that by making sure you are playing at least a GTO frequency when it comes to pre-flop for the heads up small blind. It's really, really important, especially as you get shallower. Lots of people will make mistakes when they're shallower as well. If you take a look at 5BB, for example, yes, we never shove fold, but getting the confidence to be happy about shoving Jack 4 off at 5 big blinds is another step, very, very significant in terms of this will cap your win rate so much if you don't have the correct shoving ranges when you're shallow, and making sure that at 3BB, at 2BB, you're not missing out on the hands that you should be playing. And then at 8BB, 6BB, have an understanding of the kind of hands you should be limp trapping. Make sure again that your VPIP is wide. That will help a lot with your heads up small blind VPIP. Just as a little example, again, I'll pull up my 25-cent games so you can have a look. Don't actually know what these are, so I hope they're okay. Maybe I'm too tight. 93%. That's across all stack depths. So again, trying to show small samples, admittedly, but trying to show that playing against the micro games, I'm trying to make sure my VPIP is wide enough for the heads up small blind. Texas Tomo's third and final pre-flop must not make error for low stakes spins is making sure you're not under ISOing from the heads up big blind. This was a big problem I had for a long time in my spin and go game. I really struggled when it came to ISOing. We can actually have a look at, say, 16 big blinds, for example. And we'll have a look at the kind of hands that should be ISO'd. I had a big problem ISO bluffing. For a long time, there was a kind of, I was aware that I should be raising more from the heads up big blind, but I didn't know exactly how to do it. And I tried to, let's say, compensate what I felt was the perceived lack of raising by trying to raise more value. And I always struggled with my heads up big blind. I could never get my win rates high enough in this spot. And trying to take the concept of ISO with a polar range. So what do I mean by when I say a polar range? We're gonna do a little bit of a poker 101 here. So a polar range basically means we have some strong hands, and then we have a gap, and then we have some weak hands. It's polarized at either poles. Why this is quite unintuitive is often you think, well, if 9-2 off why would I just raise 10-9 off? It's a better hand. Or Jack 10 off. It's a better hand, etc., etc. The fact is, 10-9 off, it has a lot better, or if we take, actually, for example, let's take a hand that never ISOs, right? Let's take a hand like Jack 8 suited, never ISOs. Now, at 16 big blinds, Jack 8 suited has just so much playability when it comes to post-flop situations. When you ISO, there's a good chance that you're going to win the hand pre-flop, right? You're going to raise to 3 big blinds, heads up someone's going to fold, and you're going to win. What you have to remember is that what you're risking is the opportunity to pay that pot post-flop with your hand. Now, it's not that big a problem if you're risking the opportunity with a hand like 10-2 off or Jack 2 off. These are kind of not very good hands. So the EV difference when the heads up swample and limps and you check back with 10-2 off isn't that high typically, right? There's not many boards that you connect well with. It's pretty difficult, even on 10 high boards, right? You might be outkicked, etc., etc. You're not going to flop a flush draw with 10-2 off typically, or a good flush draw. You're not going to flop a good straight draw. It's a very unplayable hand, and therefore the opportunity cost to ISO it compared to checking back is much less. So polarization is a good thing, and polarization is something that you should definitely try and utilize more of for most of you in your games, and that means making sure that you're bluff ISOing enough of the time. Lots of people, there's a bit of a recurring debate about whether to ISO bluffs or not ISO bluffs. If you're someone that says, no, bro, you don't understand, at the low stakes, like, I ISO and it just doesn't work. Like, when I ISO my bluff, they call me too much. So why would I ever do that? I would encourage you, just check your numbers. Again, I would say of probably the hundreds of players that I've looked at heads up big blind ISOing stats with over the years, the number of people who found that their ISO bluffs were making less money than checking back,
You might want to check your notes.
was zero. I have literally never worked with a guy who, over a decent sample, was not making more money ISOing their bluffs than checking their bluffs. I'll do a very quick example for guys maybe wanting to, at home, you dear viewers wanting to follow along. If we were to pull up our heads up big blind, again, this is my 100 game, 25-cent sample, so really useful data here. And you can see my ISO is currently 39. Yeah, admittedly, that's probably just about okay. Like, we could expect to make it a little bit higher. You can see my bluff frequency is exactly 50-50, which is probably not too bad numbers to aim for, but that's going to be a small sample, right? If you look at your numbers and you see that you have an overall ISO of maybe 32, 34, that's going to be costly. There will really be a cap on your win rate. Again, ISOing too much is a problem. If you're ISOing at 65, 70, that's too much. If you're ISOing, I would say below 35, that's typically a problem. It's going to cost you chips in the long run. Now, let's have a look at just how my bluff ISOs are doing. So what we're going to do, we're going to action opportunities. We're going to pre-flop opportunities to raise limpers. This is like a proper coaching session all of a sudden I'm putting on YouTube. I don't normally do this. So this is opportunities to raise limpers. We can have a look and see facing a limp. I'm making 32 BB. That's nice. And then we can have a look and see, well, let's pick some bluff hands. So we'll do hand values, whole card range selection, hold'em hand range. Yes, we're using PT4 in 2025. I love PT4, so I don't care. I'm going to use it. Other software is probably available. Save and apply. We can have a look and see how my trash hands do. The overall, my trash hands are making minus 30. Again, this compares to like a minus 100 or something baseline, but like, that's not necessarily a bad thing, making minus 30 with our worst hands. Let's have a look and see what happens when we raise them versus when we check back. So we'll do pre-flop, we'll do pre-flop raises, we'll do any raise. So we've already faced a limp, and now we're going to raise with this group of hands. These are all bluffs. I would never really, maybe a couple of them I'd have a raise fold, but raise call, but majority just assume they're all bluffs. Let's have a look and see what my win rate is when I raise them. 52, quite a lot better. When I don't raise them, let's have a look. Again, samples are low, but I was fairly confident in this, even with the low samples. Minus 50. So we're seeing almost a big blind difference when I ISO bluff hands versus when I don't ISO bluff hands. And for most people at home, they're going to see somewhat of a similar difference. Maybe not quite as big, maybe bigger, who knows. But for the majority of you, if you're not currently doing this yet, if you're not currently taking the ISO bluffs, please, please, please make sure you take them. It will be really, really helpful for your win rate in the long term. There are some awkward spots you'll find yourself in post-flop situations, but if you're in doubt, just check and go for a delay, basically, is a good generic strategy advice against the majority of opponents. And I would say, even into recreationals, I typically would take them. Texas Tomo's bonus, and I think best pre-flop tip to give to low to micro stakes. We're going to take it back to some proper 2017 early recreational coaching that I did. It's the concept called dynamic versus static EV. We've already had a look and we've talked about the VPIPs. We've talked about the heads up VPIPs, the small blind versus big blind VPIPs. And we talked about heads up big blind ISOing. Now, why is it, if you're making more money, that you don't just ISO every single hand all the time? Why are you not advocating for that? Texas Tomo, you told me I make more money when I ISO my bluffs, which is true. So why don't I just ISO all bluffs all the time? You can't do that. Why not? Because the EVs that are generated from both in theoretical play, but also the EVs that you're seeing as a result of your databases, really important that they're not static EVs. Game conditions actually play a much bigger part, especially when you're playing recreationals. What do I mean by that? Let's say you're playing a recreational first hand heads up. You win the hand, you think, What a guy. What a Texas Tomo. What a great coach. I should subscribe to the Team 601 YouTube channel. If I'm currently not subscribed. You just helped me win a pot. Next hand comes. Let's say it's 22 BB. 2 hands later, same player, same recreational limps. And you decide, hey, it worked the first time. I'm going to ISO again. You raise again with Jack 2 or 8-5, whatever. It works again. Happy days. But you get a little sense based on the snap fold that small blind maybe getting a little bit cross with you. Now, you do it again at 20. This time you get called, you see bet, you get a fold, but clearly it's getting a bit frustrated. Let's say the next hand, so for example, next hand they open jam now. Heads up big blind. They ISO jam. And you're thinking, oh, that's kind of unusual.
That escalated quickly.
Fourth hand comes. Blinds have gone up again. 18 big blinds. Again, don't worry too much about the exact details. This is more of a representation. But this time, your opponent folds. Heads up small blinds. And they fold again at 16. And they fold again at 14. And now they suddenly snap limp 12. You've ISO'd them 3 times in a row. You've raised their limp 3 times in a row. Do you really think that raising them for the 4th time, their range is going to be unimpacted by your previous actions? What happens in this case is that if you can anticipate it, you should now switch your ISOing strategy to be much more value-centric, which basically means don't ISO your bluffs. This is really important. A great way to demonstrate, by the way, these dynamic strategies is think about when you've played poker, wherever you played in your last game. Doesn't matter if it's not a spin, if it's a heads up, if it's a 6 max, whatever. Think about the last time you played. Think about the last time you raised a pot pre-flop. Think about the last time you got 3-bet non-all-in by someone and you folded and you thought, was that guy bluffing me? Kind of annoying to get 3-bet. And then let's say you raised again and the same guy 3-bet you again. And you go, come on, what's this guy 3-bet me all the time? And then let's say you fold again. And the third time you get dealt a hand like, I don't know, ace 4 off. You raise again. The same player 3-bets you again. Are you really wanting to fold ace 4 now? He's 3-bet you 3 times in a row. You really just want to have a static strategy. Typically, people are flexible much more than they realize with their pre-flop strategies based on their opponent's tendencies. Recreationals too. Often I think it's overlooked. We make the assumption that recreationals are just wild and mad and they do all kinds of things. The recreational is trying to win the game often. And the recreationals often only playing 1 table. A lot of regs that are 6-tabling, 8-tabling, they're actually less aware than a recreational might be. You've ISO'd a recreational 3 times in a row. Your next bluff ISO is going to rapidly, or let's say the continued ISO bluffing is going to rapidly sink in EV. Your value ISOing is suddenly going to shoot up in EV. If you can bring this concept to the front of your mind the next time you're playing a recreational and think about what have the actions I've taken against this player been the last few times, you might be able to just ever so slightly manipulate your ranges, sort of shave off a little bit of bluffs here, add on a bit of value there, etc., etc. Sort of have a bit more fluid dancing with your opponent's strategy. That's one of the best things you can do when you're playing micro stakes to really unlock those highest win rates. It's incredibly difficult. It requires an awful lot of practice. It requires an awful lot of attention. And often it's something that I think a lot of poker coaches don't necessarily advocate for. But if you can master that, I promise you that's something that can bring a lot more EV when it comes to your pre-flop decision making, especially at the low stakes, especially against the recreationals. Those are Texas Thomas' top tip. I hope those helped. Let me know if you liked them, if you disagreed, if you have an extra one, of course. Please leave it in the comments. If you thought it was all a load of nonsense, I apologize. Probably just because our video editor did a terrible job. He didn't make my words clear enough. That's why you didn't get it. But I appreciate you watching. Thanks very much. And I'll see you in the next one.